an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Dark Lord of Derkholm, chapters 18, 19, and 20, brought to you by Patricia. In these chapters, more anxiety for me as Blade continues to not know what he's doing, be off schedule, get plagued with bad luck, and have to deal with really annoying people. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. My apologies for how I sound. I know that there are many episodes recently where I sound terrible, and here's another one. Apparently, I'm just destined to be half sick most of this winter. So, yeah, this section, man, guys, I know I've said it already about how anxious I get over some of the things that they have to deal with, but, like, this is worse in some ways because it's like when Blade and Shona and Kit and everybody were all trying to organize the soldiers for, you know, the big war that's supposed to happen at the end. There was at least a reassurance that things had not got rolling yet, that, you know, yeah, they are supposed to have done more than they did, but there's still time, and there's still space for somebody to swoop in and save them. The time starts getting slimmer and slimmer, granted, but it's not underway. And that's what's so anxiety-inducing about this first chapter, or not this first one, really the last one. Chapter 20 is the one where things really start to fall off. But things are supposed to be rolling. Things are supposed to be moving. The people are here now. It's like the difference between things going really badly at a dress rehearsal versus the actual show. And I can't tell you how bad I feel for Blade, because obviously this kid's too young to be doing this. Like, he doesn't have the experience. He doesn't have the knowledge of magic, apparently, to do some of the things that it would be really helpful if he could. And then there's the escaped soldiers, quote unquote, who kill, like, the whole band of people who are supposed to attack them. And everything is just, it's complete chaos to a different degree than what I even expected, because I thought that the chaos was going to be like, you know, it would be contained to behind the scenes, and as far as the actual pilgrims went, it wouldn't look great for them, but they also wouldn't know how badly wrong it was all going. Not really. But instead, not only does it seem like they have a pretty good indicator on how bad things are going, but there are actual protests happening with signs up saying how, you know, pilgrims go home, piss off, pilgrims, we don't want you here. Like, that really shocked me, that everybody was willing to make a public protest out of this thing, which begs the question for me on where the hell is Chesney, because I would think he would be really, like, I don't want to say hands-on, because that implies that he's doing work, which I would never expect. But I would definitely have expected Chesney to be overseeing things with, like, a beady eye. And evidently that's not how it's going. So I'm going to back up here and start from the beginning, because that's what makes sense. So, Chapter 18. When Dirk returned from soothing angry wizard guides and heard the news, he had mixed feelings. In one way, he was pleased that Blade would have Shona with him to keep him sensible. On the other hand, he was afraid that Shona was so upset at losing her career that she was thinking of getting herself killed somewhere along the way. Yeah, I feel like I actually might have mentioned that, or like low-key wondered that myself, if she was just like, fine, I'll just go with you and screw everything. Maybe I'll get killed and it'll be fine. But, you know, there's no time now for him to, like, make a substantial case against her doing this because it's tomorrow. The first pilgrim party is tomorrow. And they all head out. Blade and Shona head out translocating. And this chapter, the remainder of it is really all from Kit's perspective. And I really enjoy that he tells Kit, like, you're going to have to do the hunt. And Kit's like, well, I've called a conference. And Dirk's like, well, you have to make it really short. You don't have time for that. Kit was extremely offended, mostly because Dirk was entirely right. Kit loved holding conferences. He was always thinking of reasons for calling them and ways of making them go on as long as possible. I love it. I really do. There's something about that I find so, like, weirdly human and charming. So he has to take Beauty. She wants him to take Pretty because Pretty has gotten so attached to this elf that's in love with him that she's hoping to, like, sort of ground him a bit. But Dirk is like, listen, Pretty can't fly as far as you can. You know he can't. And I don't have time to argue about this. Like, can people just do what I'm asking without me always having to make my case for it, please? Dirk went down to check that skeletal Fran was now back, picking through the debris for the benefit of tourists. She was. Have you got everything you need? He asked her. A sight more comfort than I would have up at your house, she retorted. Dirk flew on up the valley, wondering what Fran meant by that. He had a row with old George, he supposed, though there was always the possibility that Lyda had come home and turned Fran out. I don't know what this is either. I was thinking that once he got home, it would become clear to me. I don't know if it's her talking about the dwarves and, like, not wanting to be around them, but I didn't get that impression. I mean, the dwarves are constantly, like, cooking and trying to make things a grand time, so that seems like it would be pretty comfortable, really. But yeah, I am still waiting to see if that sort of gets revealed or if I just sort of missed what it was supposed to be that Fran is irritated about here. Dirk sometimes felt that the clues were the one thing the wizard guides did not complain to him about. Yeah, so the clues. All of these carefully laid clues, which later we see Blade has found none of. Oh, poor Blaze. Sorry, I call him Blade. He kills vampires. Whatever. Yeah, Blaze, like, this is another thing that I find heartbreaking, is when somebody puts in a lot of work to do something well and then nothing gets done with that thing. And so the fact that we end the next chapter, or the third chapter, and there hasn't been a single clue turned up, I was just like, that is really a bummer, man. And I feel like eventually they will have to come across some, but I don't know why I feel that way. You know, I don't know what case I have that they will have to find them. There are other parties that probably have, so that's some comfort. But so Dirk gets home, and all of the pigs come running up to him to greet him. And there's a little aside about how he, like, tried to make the pigs into, quote, servants of the Dark Lord. Basically, he tried to turn the pigs into, like, demonic-looking things. But as soon as he put the illusion on, they had stared at their bloated black bodies in such horror that Dirk took pity on them and decided just to keep them where the pilgrims could not see them. So, yeah, that I found really sort of delightful that these that these pigs are just like, what are you doing? Are you serious? So he goes inside, and here comes a line that was underlined by 15 people, so says Kindle. I'm glad to see you got here, he said to the dwarfs. Been here for days now, said the surly one, whose name was Galadriel. Dirk had been wondering, ever since he discovered this, what Galadriel's parents had been thinking of. Y'all, that's amazing. What a weird joke. I love it. What a weird, that's just so funny to me. We'd like to see it properly stowed. And they're talking about the treasure here. Have you signed for it and be on our way home, you see, the talkative one explained. His name, more aptly, was Dworkin. So they have these 6 huge baskets of treasure, and what he's deciding to do is like to set that aside. I don't know how he's like, because we see later that Blade is talking, you see, I did it again, that Blaze is talking to a guy who's expecting these dwarves to come through with their tribute, and they haven't. And again, I don't know where Chesney is. I would think that once this stuff starts going wrong, that Chesney would be down there going like, well, what the fuck? Where's my money? But Chesney is just so much less involved once things get rolling than I expect him to be. And it probably, if the tours wrap up and the dwarves still haven't turned up, probably then Chesney will appear. But I just am surprised that he isn't keeping an eye on that, because it feels like so much of this is so much of these tours and this whole concept and setup is meant to be that just like a moneymaker for him. I mean, that's all, you know. So the dwarves are a big factor in that. And so I guess I just thought that he would be eagerly awaiting them, if not paying attention to the tours themselves, because at least the tours, he gets the people's money when they decide to join, that he gets even insurance money, like backup money, and that they pay up front. So by the time they leave for the tour, maybe he doesn't care about the actual tour going well because he has their money already. But at the very least, I thought the dwarves, he would be like sitting there looking at his watch waiting for them to come through. And apparently not. So this is when Dirk gets the idea to ask the dwarves if they would be willing to play the role of his dark servitors, and he could change their appearance and whatnot. And they make a bargain, 40 gold each. It rather pleased him that Mr. Chesney should pay the dwarfs for once instead of the other way around. That's a good point if it works out. I'm behind this. There was no time for anything but skin-deep changes. I love this description. Other wizards who were more practiced in this kind of work might have done it, but Dirk had worked with animals and plants all his life, and he was slow with buildings. And first things first, the dwarfs needed the kitchen, and the animals needed protection. So he has him like piling everything in different places and then hiding them, and then he does the transformations. The garden became a desolate forecourt with pitfalls and chained monsters in place of the flower beds. The bushes and trees were broken black pillars or mazes of evil black walls. For the house itself, Dirk followed Colette's design drawing for the completed citadel and made it a tortured black facade full of weird sharp angles, twisted arches, and impossibly jutting towers. It looked highly impressive against the sunset. But since it was only an inch thick, Dirk could not have any pilgrims going inside it to confront him. Fortunately, Colette had left the enlarged terrace almost as it was. All the griffins liked it this way because it was so big. Dirk added broken black archways along the front of it, twisted like the towers and tormented low walls. Then, to prevent anyone going in through the front door, he constructed a long trench of illusory balefire just in front of the doorstep. This looked surprisingly impressive, flickering white and wraith-like in the growing dark. Dirk considered a moment and then added an impression of untold depth to the trench. Like that, it made the perfect place to be done to death in. The pilgrims could think they were hurling the Dark Lord down into a bottomless pit. Quite pleased with his evening's work, Dirk walked through the trench and entered the house where the dwarves were making rather appetizing smells. So, that sounds awesome, and this is the sort of thing that I really would love to see on screen, is like the, not the citadel itself, but the creation of it from a place that's actually rather homely and pleasant, turning it into this, like, you know, really forbidding, horrible place. Also, there's a description about the chained monsters at one point, and I'm trying to find the spot where he talks about this because I find this really creepy. Here it is. He was a little startled by the flowerbed monsters. He had not realized that a griffin's notion of a monster would be something made up of bits of human being. Still, they were unusual, and they stirred their many misplaced legs and wagged their several shaggy heads in the breeze in a horribly lifelike way. Yo, if that isn't the creepiest fucking thing you've ever heard, I swear to God. Do you know what this reminds me of? Those of you who are patrons and who have listened to the what do you call it? Unspooked at Halloween. There is an episode called the Akatixidi, which is one longer story about this creature that imitates what it sees in the woods, and it turns itself into what it finds or sees. And at one point, someone comes across it, and it is made from different parts of a human being that are like put together to look sort of like a person, but not exactly. And it doesn't walk quite properly. And it makes noises like speech, but not exactly. And it is such a freaky little story. And I really like the idea of these monsters being, that caught me off guard. Oh my God, Patricia's here saying his name is Blade. So I keep saying Blaze. How am I this dense? I've been reading this book for ages. Good Lord. That is so funny to me. I'm like, oh, it can't be Blade. It's gotta be Blaze. Natasha, it's fine. But yeah, the whole, like, that is some human centipede shit. That's real next level freak that sort of sounds like it's maybe too much. Like we're bordering on, dial it back a little bit. And he has old George, who is also supposed to be like wandering around the outside looking emaciated and like a skeleton. And I love that he's like, he induced old George to wear the fluttering shreds of garments. I'm not decent, old George protested, to which Dirk replied, no, you're a walking corpse and you're beyond that. I can't. It's so funny. But then he realizes that the valley around the house is supposed to be like this wasteland. And he totally forgot to do that. So it's very green and lush and covered in frost, but then comes his house, which is a disaster. So then comes the description of how fucking wimpy these pilgrims are. Guys, this is hysterical. I didn't expect this, mostly because I figured that by the time you get to the end, you've gone through so much that you become a little bit like reckless as a pilgrim, right? But that's also me sort of thinking of it in the way that I would if it were like a video game, where you get to the end and you're like, well, I've got all these lives, so I'm just going to go for it. But we know that there are people who are assigned to be killed on these tours. Like, this is genuinely, people have died. People that they have been with as pilgrims have died. So I can understand people being a little bit more afraid than I anticipated, actually, because there are consequences in this game, and I put game in quotes, that I'm not sure they were prepared for. Like, they describe later this insurance money, which is a huge scam. But I think that, you assume that has to do with like accidents, things going wrong. When they see people dying, is that something they knew was a possibility? Were they aware? I mean, of course, that they are not themselves aware that they are on the list of people who are expendable. But if you aren't on that list, do you know that this is something that can happen? Like, that's just that. Oof. I couldn't do it. If I knew that, like, well, some people die on this. Nope. So, 2 steps later, old George crossed their path, uttering muted cries. It was not exactly wailing. It sounded more like, ho, ho, ho. The pilgrims backed away from him. Finn shoved them forward. Old George, pleased with the effect he was having, stopped and faced them. I was once a prince like you, he announced. Oh, shut up and go away, George, Dirk murmured, pacing the entrance. Finn obviously felt the same. Avaunt, he said, and threw witchfire at old George. Old George retreated, huffily muttering, I was only doing it to oblige. Ah, this is such a weird book, you guys. This is so funny to me. So, then comes the little battle with the dwarves who are the, the minions. And that goes really well, actually. Nobody gets hurt. The battle looks impressive. The dwarves themselves look really creepy and weird, with their hair all being like writhing snakes. And then comes the demon. And the demon, it seems, might be what pushes all of these poor, unsuspecting pilgrims over the edge in terms of them not having any courage later on when it's time to face down with Dirk, because this thing is so intimidating that it seems like it leaves them all quite breathless. Like even Dirk, who knows and has encountered this demon before, is shaken afterwards by it. I'm going to read this here. With a noise like the sky splitting, a vast blue 3-legged being loomed above the fighting. Its rat tail toyed and slithered among Dirk's black archways. The blueness of it pulsed nastily, and the nearness of it scalded everyone's mind like salt water on a fresh graze. Old George was suddenly wailing in earnest in the background. The dwarfs fled, screaming, and the pilgrims only stayed where they were because Finn slammed a quick immobility spell on them. In the distance, Dirk could hear the pigs shrilling. He was quite at a loss himself. He simply had not expected the demon to appear. The demon had 2 eyes glaring greedily upon the transfixed pilgrim party, and the third swiveled to look sarcastically at Dirk. He felt the bleach-like burn of it on his mind. That's why I'm here. I warned you. I shall appear like this to every tour party. But why? Dirk wondered. I have my reasons. Be sure I don't do it to oblige you, little wizard. And it was gone, in another zigzag of blue light, just as Finn, white as a sheet and shaking all over, had nerved himself to raise a hand and quaver, Avaunt. How do I manage to follow an effect like that? Dirk wondered irritably. But he doesn't have to worry about it. This is so funny, guys. The pilgrims stopped dead again at the sight of him. Finn kicked the nearest one in the ankle. We know your weakness, the man said uncertainly. Your time is up, Dark Lord. The next part was truly difficult. Try as he might, Dirk could not get the pilgrims even to attempt to kill him. He bellowed with sinister laughter. He loomed over them, uttering threats. He adopted a toneless, chilling voice and explained that he was about to toss each of them into this bottomless pit flaming with balefire. This pit. Here. Then he went and stood invitingly beside the trench. But they simply stood and stared at him. It was not for nearly a quarter of an hour until Finn managed to cannon into the woman who managed to be in front, causing her to stumble against Dirk with a scream, that Dirk was able to consider the deed done. In the greatest relief, he threw up his arms and toppled sideways into the trench. From there, he heard the woman burst into tears. That's horrible, she wept. Whatever it was entitled to life, just like we are. What? These people, okay. And this woman, later on, says something, but we don't approve of the way you exploit this whole world for and they like another woman stops her and like shushes her and gets her to gets her to leave through the portal that they're supposed to go back to their own world through. But I was really surprised that one of the pilgrims themselves is saying like, I'm not okay with this. What did she think this was? Is it just that all of the protests along the way are getting to her? Were there more than one? But yeah, totally did not see that coming. And so the sweet little thing, like, she doesn't realize that Dirk is just play acting and that he's not even like, this Dark Lord thing at all. She thinks that this is yet another moment of someone actually getting hurt here. And I just think that is the cutest, sweetest thing. And I really like the fact that they sort of shushed her and hurried her out. I was like, oh man, I want to know about that. So, all right. And Patricia says, don't forget Mara's work too. We haven't seen it yet that I know of. Is there something that I'm missing there, Patricia? Because Blade is heading over there, but we don't get there in this section. But okay, so let's see. There's coffee, because the dwarves don't like it, so some of that's actually left. Poor Finn is just so exhausted. Just saying that they are such a bunch of wimps. None of the gods did manifest. I made my tour one down in your village in the end, a sort of smiling child promising them success. I hope you don't mind. I hope the real gods don't. Dirk turned one of Colette's drawings over and wrote on the back of it, Fran, to tell wizards smiling child in village, as a reminder to himself to make sure the other wizards faked a god too. Kirita had really let him down there. Yeah, she did. Whoops. So, there are 2 more parties waiting in the village. I'll drop a hint to them on my way back if you like, and they can have their gods before coming on up here. By the way, whatever went wrong in Chell, I arrived to find the place deserted. I had a real job to keep my party from seeing the other ones, and a lot of fast talking to do when we found the Duke in a dungeon. Your elves managed quite well considering, but where did all the people go? So, again, what is this? Is this a part of the protest? Is this like an organized, strike, essentially? So then we go to chapter 19, where it's Blade and Shona. Blade, not Blaze. Blade and Shona. And they are staying at this inn to prepare before their party arrives. And they think that they're going to be able to like study this black book that has all of the instructions in it. And they don't actually get a chance to do that because they are so excited or so exhausted that they fall asleep every time they get a chance, basically. Every time there's downtime, they pass out. This has me a little suspicious, to be honest. Like, I don't doubt that they're very exhausted and that you would want to sleep every chance you got after being either forced awake or sleeping on the ground outside the way that they were when they were dealing with the soldiers. But I feel like we know Kirita is low-key sabotaging a bunch of stuff, and I wouldn't be surprised if she was, like, putting something that makes them sleepy into the food, so that they don't get a chance to, like, get a good handle on everything so that things don't go well. There is this amazing... So, first off, the landlord is apologetic because what they're eating, they keep having, like, the same meals over and over. The landlord looked long suffering. Don't blame me, blame the wife. She joined this women against pilgrim parties they're all joining this year and walked out a month ago. Took all the barmaids with her and left me on my own. Bread and stew is all I know how to cook. So yeah, there are actual like committees and things happening. And poor Blade is trying to learn this book at the very last second on the final day, but he knows that it's a losing battle, and he's just going to have to sort of play it by ear and look up each day as it comes. But the one thing that he does realize is that wizards are supposed to be wearing these like robes, have long hair and beards, and have a staff. Basically, they're supposed to get the Gandalf look. And he had forgotten about that. So he's able to make a beard, but he looks so young underneath it that it like just seems really hilarious. And also, he's very short. So there's something about him that looks very like dwarf-like. He has robes, but they're like way too big for him. And he has a spoon, a wooden spoon that he wants to transform into a staff. But no matter what he does, this thing, even as a staff, has a big wide flat part on one end that's obviously the spoon. So Shona here steps in. She gets some scissors and cuts the beard around his mouth so that he can eat and talk. And it's not, because it just basically, he didn't have a mustache. It was just growing over his mouth. She prized the spoon out of his hand and fetched him a walking stick someone had left in the inn hat stand. And she cut his robes down to the right size and begins hemming them. And when he sees all of the pilgrims begin to arrive, Blade panics for a second and is like, oh God, I need to go and meet them. But Shona's like, you don't need to go and meet them. They're going to arrive at the inn. They're going to put their stuff down. They're going to get comfortable and relaxed. And like, you'll go and meet them all downstairs at dinner time. Chill. And he's like, okay, yeah. No, you're right. And this I just found like to be a really nice moment of everybody has their skills, and Shona is obviously a little bit more like me in that she knows how things are supposed to go. She's a bard, right? So storytelling is her deal. Entertaining people is her deal. And so she has a much more acute understanding of the order in which things should happen, the vibe that people should be in as they get here, like, how they need to settle in and relax before they're really ready to meet the wizard who's going to lead them around. And so this is a nice nod to that skill set that doesn't have anything to do with just singing and entertaining people. This is much more sort of, what's the word I want? Comprehensive, I guess. And it's really true that this is something that certain people don't know how to do. For example, really brief aside here, Owen, he loves to have people over. We love to host parties, but he doesn't think through how that has to go. So he's like, well, I want to do this and I want to do this and I want to do this. And I'm like, okay, well, do you want to do that for before or after? And he'll be like, well, what does it matter? And I have to be like, well, if we do it before, we need to have all of this stuff out because that room is going to be filled with X, Y, Z. And he's like, oh yeah, I guess you're right. And it's always nice to see somebody especially when I'm having like anxiety attacks over what's going on, to see somebody who steps in with the same sort of sense of things that I have and be like, listen, all right, hold on, chill. You need to calm down. It's all going to be fine. And here's why. And to really explain why. She doesn't just tell him, if there's no time, you need to let me fix this. She tells him exactly why and makes it sound like it within the storyline that they're supposed to be like following is the right thing to do. Meanwhile, outside, there are basically picketers yelling, go home, pilgrims, ban the tours. There really is strong feeling, Shona remarked. Blade could not be bothered with that. Between the crowds, he could just see the heads of other people coming up the middle of the street. So let's jump ahead here to Blade introducing himself to all of the different people. First, he meets with a guy who is wondering where the hell the dwarves are. The man waiting at the back door wore a casual version of the kind of clothes Mr. Chesney and his people had worn. Sorry about this, wizard, he said. I oughtn't to be here, really, but there's a bit of a crisis at the portal. We're 10 parties of dwarfs short. Only one came through. You didn't happen to see any others on your way here, did you? With ponies and baskets? Blade asked. That'll be them, the man said, obviously relieved. How far off were they? Quite a long way, Blade said, truthfully. They grumbled about the way they were delayed. He felt so dishonest that he was forced to stroke his beard and look wise. The tour man pulled his own chin in a worried way. I don't know what to do then. The last pair of pilgrims just came through and the portal's due to be closed in an hour. There'll be a right stink if the dwarfs aren't here by then. I could lose my job. Look, if you see them on your route, better tell them to make for the Dark Lord's Citadel instead, and we'll take the lot through from there. And I'll ask the other wizard guides to tell them all the same, all right? So this, wound up not leading to anything, but I really did worry that because the dwarves actually are at the Dark Lord's Citadel, that they were going to figure it out and see, some of his dark servitors and, make it, put two and two together and realize what was going on. But I needn't have worried because it doesn't look like they have anybody that's, got any more training at the exit other than somebody who's sort of like a stewardess who's like, thank you for coming. I hope you had a nice time. Bye. And that's it. Because I really thought that some people were going to come through and just be like, listen, okay, what the hell is going on here? Let's see. Oh, here it is. He went down after half an hour. By that time, at least half the 20 people on his list were sitting about on the benches awkwardly drinking tankards of beer and getting to know one another. I know it's expensive, a woman was saying as Blade came in. Dad and I sold our house to come on this tour, but we wanted to do something really interesting before we got too old to enjoy it. That's right, Mother, agreed the man beside her. Nothing ventured. Okay, two things. One, is this Mike Pence? Because who in the fuck calls each other Dad and Mother and uses those as names? That is the creepiest shit. I hate it. And also, can we just talk about how, unbalanced it is that he's dad and she's not mom? She's mother. He is, or mum, even. He's not father, though. Why? Also, we sold our house to come on this tour. That's insanity. Whoa, that is an amount of money that I was not ready for. I figured that this was a very expensive thing. I didn't figure it was like that. I figured that it was probably 15, 20 grand. If you sell your house, you're looking at 100 grand, at least. That's banana pants. So then we meet fucking Suki, who is insufferable. And this is really funny because Blade can't stand her, but it turns out the other person from his world thinks she's super hot, I guess, okay. Ooh, shrieked a false mare girl. It's our wizard. Look, bro, a real wizard. Isn't he small? I have dwarven ancestry, Blade lied rather crossly. Why couldn't he grow the way Kit did? The girl was Susan Slateholm on the list and down as a late entry. She had big blue eyes and her hair hung in masses of not quite real curls like wood shavings. She squealed excitedly and hung on to Blade's newly hemmed sleeve. Call me Suki, she said, staring fixedly up into Blade's eyes. She was even shorter than he was. I'm Suki and this is my brother, Jeffrey. So, he does not like her. The dad and mother are mostly fine, but just really silly. There are some more people that we don't really get an introduction to, just a very vague description. And then comes the last pilgrim to arrive, a shortish, fair-haired young man who came sauntering down the stairs with an air. He was obviously rich enough to not have to sell anything to afford the tour. Blade could tell he was, both from his air and from his clothes, which were stylish and made of very good cloth, and he was almost the only pilgrim who wore those clothes as if they were not fancy dress. Blade looked at him with relief, because he knew he would remember this man. In fact, as he hurried over to him, Blade had a feeling he did remember this man. So yeah, this whole thing goes down Blade's I swear I remember you. Then it turns out the guy's name is at the very bottom of the thing as a late entry. And I was like, yeah, no, this guy's not a pilgrim. He's just tagging along for some reason. And then comes this woman, who, oh my God, she's awful. The lady smoothed her neat maroon-colored trousers and patted the pearls around the neck of her fluffy white sweater before she looked at Blade. It was a totally immovable look. Young man, I see no reason at all to masquerade in silly clothing like yours. What I have on is respectable and practical, and I shall continue to wear it. Come along, Eldred, don't dawdle. The man with her came forward vaguely. He was tall and thin, too, with deep creases down his cheeks and deep, hollow eyes, and he had a lot of fine, fluffy white hair. And her name is Ledbury, and he calls her Mrs. Ledbury. The lady looked at him chillingly. Miss Ledbury, if you please, young man. Professor Ledbury is my brother. He is a very learned man, and naturally a trifle vague. You cannot expect him to bother with your rules. He is above them, and I disregard such things. Sit down beside me here, Eldred. Oh my God. I kind of love her, in a way. Like, as much as she's awful and the embodiment of, like, white customer privilege, like, this is a woman that you fucking encounter when you work anywhere, where she literally is just like, well, I don't follow rules like that. And she doesn't get how absurd that is, that you just don't get to say that. But I do love the fact that she isn't going to buy into this bullshit of sleeping on bedrolls and drinking out of leather fucking canteens. She's like, no, I have coffee. I have chocolate. I brought a sleeping bag. Get the fuck out of my face. Like, you know what? I kind of feel you though, girl. Like, why not though? Shona made her entry. Here comes the sort of, what's the thing? This is sort of a big moment for her. Shona came down the stairs carrying her harp and wearing her green bardic robes, and she came with such an air that Blade could have sworn that not one pilgrim noticed that the robes were creased all over and ragged where they'd been unraveled to make magic rains. Good evening, she cried ringingly. Ladies and gentlemen, I am the official bard to your pilgrim party. Everyone's head turned, even Miss Ledbury's waved helmet, and there were cries of admiration interrupted by Mother Poole calling out, "Oh, do come and sit with me and Dad, dear." Shona did not leave the stairs straight away. She stood 3 steps up, staring across the tap room, and it seemed to Blade slowly to come alight. It was as if the life in her, which had not been there since the bard handed her the scroll, came welling back into her, and then welling up further, until Shona was twice as alive as she had been, brimming with life, glowing with it. Miss Ledbury's lips pursed. Her head turned to look in a certain direction, disapprovingly. Blade turned to look the way Miss Ledbury and Shona were both looking, and saw Geoffrey Slightholm on the end of both gazes. He was looking back at Shona with the same sort of dawning of life. Oh dear. Love at first sight. Has anybody experienced this before? Because I have, and it is the weirdest. I had this when I met my first husband, Brendan. Brendan and I took one look at each other, and it was clear. And I was already engaged when I met him, so it was very inconvenient for me. And I remember thinking that, being like, oh, I can't be doing this right now. No. But it was just, there are times where you see a person and it is like you recognize them from somewhere, like you knew them already. And there is nothing to be done about it. It's really like a force of nature. And you can say all you want that, like, well, you know, but Natasha, you were engaged. Didn't matter. I left him. Like, there was just simply no way to stop what was going to happen. It's like it's its own entity. And I really feel for Shona here, because when this happens, nothing compares to that feeling. It's this like the description of having life poured into you is exactly it. Everything becomes more stark and more like you get more aware somehow of everything, because you're recontextualizing your entire life in terms of now being with this new person. So everything looks new and different because now it's life post meeting so-and-so. It's just this description I thought was really apt. And unfortunately, when Blade checks out who this kid is, it turns out he's expendable and supposed to be arranged to be killed either by pirates or elves. That sucks. And he's thinking that I hope that they like fight or split up before that happens, because it's obvious that if something were to happen to this guy, Shona's going to be even worse off if something happens to Jeffrey. But Jeffrey obviously likes Shona too, and they just stick to each other like glue. So there's no like getting between them. There's no keeping that from happening. I really feel for her. And I hope that they can come up with something like, you know, he's supposed to be dead. The expendable part is to keep him out of the way of whoever in Chesney's world wants him out of the way, right? So can you fake someone's death? Can they do that and just be like, oh yeah, he never came back. Obviously, he must have died on the tour. But have him be fine and living with Shona? Is that an option? That'd be cool. Figure out a way to make everybody happy. Okay, so some of it was the way all the pilgrims seemed to rely on him and kept asking him things, even how to eat their suppers. He was not sure he could stand being in charge to this extent. The worst was when he had to show Dad Poole how to use the toilet. Oh man, you guys. So as somebody who is like dealing with more people now than I ever have in terms of like my podcast and people coming at me with questions, I feel this on a cellular level. Like there are a couple of questions that everybody asks, and I have tried everything I can think of to make the answer to this question obvious, to put it places where people will see the answer to the question, to just generally make life easier on everyone, and nobody seems to read the things or find the things, and so I wind up having to answer them anyway. Or people will ask me basic questions that I can't believe they're even asking, because I'm like, if you can't figure out how to do that, I don't know how you've signed up to be a patron in the first place. Like, just there are genuinely moments where I'm like, I must be misunderstanding what they're asking, because there's no way they could be asking me that. Is there? And yeah, when it's like even how to eat their supper, that's exactly it. I have had people ask me like, well, how do I get to the feed on Patreon? And I'm like, genuinely, how do you sign up to be a patron and not know how to get to the feed? Like, how did you get to Patreon and get through the whole system? Because once you sign up, that's your feed. Everything is there. And if I'm the only person you've ever pledged, which I must be because you don't know how to do this, I'm the only game in town. I'm the only one on your feed. So I just like, I'm like, I don't understand. So yeah, this whole thing with him just being like, oh man, I don't know if I want to do this. Like he's, you know, he was so excited when he first was told that he was going to be leading one, but surprise. Meanwhile, Suki is like haunting his footsteps, wants to be around him every second of the day, flirting shamelessly, just generally like being really, really, cloying and clingy. Then Miss Ledbury. Oh, she turns out to be the one that's going to be taking notes? Oh, you don't say. Come on, of course she is. She's got a fucking notebook. She's writing everything down. She scribbled in code or shorthand. Blade had looked and found he could not read a word. Don't pry, young man, Miss Ledbury said. It's not your place. Eldred, that's enough beer tonight. It's too sour. It'll disagree with you. Blade hated the way she ordered her poor, vague brother about, and he heartily resented the way she treated Blade himself like a servant. Young man, fetch the landlord. The stew is uneatable. I do not intend to indulge in privations just for sport. After that, she brought out a special jar of coffee from her bag and made Blade get a kettle of boiling water and some cream. No, Eldred, not for you. Coffee keeps you awake. So this is when Blade tries to sleep and begins to do some math to figure out exactly how much money everybody is spending on these tours, and via that number, how much money Mr. Chesney is making from these tours. As he tossed and turned, Blade found himself adding up what Mother Poole had sold her house for. He did not know what a credit was worth, so he called it a gold piece. multiplying that amount by 20 for the rest of the pilgrims, then by 125 for the other tours, adding in this insurance thing, multiplying that by 125, then remembering that people paid more thousands of these credits to have Prince Talathan put his sword through pilgrims, adding that in too at an average of 2 expendables a party, then putting a value on all that gold 11 parties of dwarves brought in each year, and the answer came out with so many noughts on the end that Blade thought he must have gone to sleep in the middle and multiplied it all by 1,000 by mistake. He turned over on his pillow and did the sum again, and it was the same huge number of gold pieces. Then he compared this figure with the money that the wizards and kings got paid and remembered that Mara was not getting paid at all. It did not take much thinking to work out that Mr. Chesney was making more money in a year than there was in Blade's whole world, and Blade's people were the ones who did all the work. "But that's not fair," he murmured, and went to sleep at last, as if his mind had been waiting for him to arrive at saying that before it would let him stop thinking. Yeah, so something needs to be done about Mr. Chesney. I think we can all agree, and I really want to see it happen. So, in the morning, it's time to get the horses and head out. And the woman who is the one that's like in charge of all of the horses, she only has that there are supposed to be 20. The horse lady. And he's like, actually, there are 2 newbies and my sister's here as bard. 2 more than I was told even without your sister. Why can't they get it right? Very well, I'll bring them around to the inn with feed. And the reason I'm doing this myself is that I want to make it clear that if anyone mistreats a horse or hurts one in any way, I shall call them all in and you can do the rest on foot. Have you got that? I'm going around all the tours saying this. I'm giving warning. Right, said Blade. By the way, how much do they pay you for the horses? Not enough, the horse lady replied over her shoulder as she strode away. It wouldn't be, Blade thought. So, everybody had gone to the market and got themselves some swords. They come back and they get on their horses. And Miss Ledbury, this is where we see that she's got like actual sleeping bags. She's got windbreakers, which are called wind cheaters, which I find sort of adorable. And backpacks, plastic water bottles, the whole deal. And she's like, well, our equipment is much more efficient. The trouble was, Blade rather agreed with her, but he did not like to see good blankets and water bottles wasted. He strapped them on his own horse instead. Oh, wizard, take mine as well, Suki said. They're such a nuisance. You'll be cold, Blade said. You can give them me tonight, she said, archly smiling. Oh, God. So, then comes the instant when Geoffrey says, let's get moving, shall we? Everyone, to Blade's mortification, instantly obeyed Geoffrey. Mother Poole floundered aboard again. Revel got on his horse, and the procession straggled out of town, pursued by barking dogs and children, shouting, "Go home, tourists, and piss off, pilgrims." Miss Ledbury managed to make a note about this as she rode. So the merchant who's supposed to be leading them is really not pleased with anything. Everything is terrible. This is the last tour, and he is so eager to have it done. They're supposed to be attacked by these bandits who never materialize. And fucking Suki comes up to him and is like, "Oh, wizard, is it true that a special magic happens when a wizard kisses you?" Blade felt hot under his beard and wholly trapped. He did not know what it was about Suki, a smell, a look, or something. But every time she came close to him, she seemed to remind him of someone else he disliked very much, though he could not for the life of him think who. I am dying to know what that's about. Is Suki somebody that he has met before that he disliked? Like, where does that come from? I just really want to know. And he winds up telling her to go away, and she says there's no need to be rude. He watched her go up to her brother, Geoffrey, and tell him how rude Blade had been, but Geoffrey was helping Shona unload her horse, and he simply said something brief and sarcastic. Suki had been sulking ever since. So, they all go to bed, And here, let's see, I'm finding out. And one of the Leadberries, the old man, is wearing like long underwear under his clothes. He's trying to think of who it is that Revel reminds him of, and then he figures it out and tells him in the morning, you were with Kirita and King Luther and the High Priest Umru when Dad and I visited the White Oracle. Revel's brows went down and his lips pursed, though, again to Blade's relief, he was still amused. "Score 1 to you," he said, "and here was I, trained never to forget a face, and I'd clean forgotten you, after you put that cold spell on us, too. I'm slipping. Blame that awful beard. What do you want from me?" "What are you doing here with this pilgrim party?" Blade asked. Revel grinned and pulled up his left sleeve. Fastened all the way up his arm was a row of wristwatches, nearly 20 of them, as far as Blade could tell. "Thieves' Guild," Revel explained. "These little clocks can fetch as much as 1,000 gold each. People don't have them here. The pilgrims take them off with their other off-world gear and give them to the landlord to put back across the portal for them. He leaves them in his strong cupboard until he's got the lot. I walk in, pretending to be another pilgrim, and pay the cupboard a visit. Bingo. Boringly easy, except that this time you gave me a bad moment looking for me up on your list. I had to do some quick faking while your back was turned. And then I spot those two who refuse to be parted from their off-world stuff. She's got that torch and that recorder and a hot flask, and I think she's got a weapon, too. I haven't discovered what he's got yet. But you can understand the challenge, can't you?" "Yes," Blade admitted. "She watches all her stuff like a hawk as well. I can't resist, but I'm here with Kirita's permission. If you want a deal to keep your mouth shut, it won't be worth much." So, first of all, he says, "I think she's got a weapon too, but I haven't discovered what it is yet." And I have to assume it's a gun, because she is the type. Am I wrong? If it's not a gun, it's something hilarious like mace. But I feel like she's the type that would have a gun. I don't know why, just, she's a lady of extremes, I definitely feel like. So Blade makes a deal with him about what to do to keep Blade quiet. "I won't say a word to anyone if you can take Suki off my hands." Revel stared at him as if he thought he had gone mad. After a moment he said, "Let's get this straight. Did I hear you correctly? You don't want Suki?" "Yes," Blade said, "I don't." "But wizards always get themselves the most gorgeous. It's part of the perks. You should see some of the other wizards." "Ye gods, are you sure about this? This has made my day. All right, it's a deal." Blade followed slowly, slightly bewildered. Revel was probably only about 6 years older than he was. Did 6 years really make that much difference to the way someone looked at Suki? Blade hoped not. Or not where he was concerned himself. If it did, then something obviously went seriously wrong with your mind in those 6 years. So, Priscilla, remind me how old Blade is supposed to be. I think I had him at like 14. I had him because he's, trying to enter high school. So this kid is like 21, maybe. I thought it was 16. Oh, okay. So he's older than I thought. Yeah, so I'm a little surprised that this apparently hasn't turned into anything for him, because 16, you're well on your way as a young man to being interested in women. But maybe Blade's gay. I don't know. Maybe she's just not his type. She seems insufferable, but apparently that doesn't matter to Revel, so who knows. The bandits did not attack that night. The merchant was very irritated. It says within 3 days. They're probably going to do it tomorrow morning as a surprise. So all day the next day, they wait, and there are no bandits, and it's also pouring rain. So the merchant finally comes up to Blade and is like, "What the fuck is going on?" And Shona, by the way, has gone off to make out with Jeffrey, and comes back looking very pale and tells him to come with her. Jeffrey winds up being like, "Listen, I'll take him up there. You stay here." Puzzled and cross, Blade followed Jeffrey up through damp grass and sopping bushes into woodland, where he caught hair and beard and robes on low branches while Jeffrey strode irritatingly freely ahead. They went a long way to kiss one another, he thought angrily. Then they came to the place, and Blade stopped being annoyed with Geoffrey and was glad he was there. It had been the bandits' ambush, certainly, but the bandits had been ambushed themselves. There were nearly 30 people lying in ungraceful attitudes under the trees, with rain trickling on their clothes and pattering upon their white, unfeeling faces. Blade felt sick when he saw the wounds on some of them. The attacks had been brutal. So yeah, that sucks. They're all dead. This is fucking everything up, and this is the moment where Blade thinks back to that everything went wrong. So he goes back and tries to be like, I have foreseen danger. And he decides that he's going to, that he wants to get everybody away from there as fast as he can because he's worried about these fucking soldiers being around ready to hurt anybody. He knew he could not either do, translocate them all alone or try to bring all the pilgrims and their horses with him if he went. He thought he controlled his panic. He told himself he was quite calm, but he knew what those soldiers were like, and now looking at the dead bandits, he knew what they could do to people. His one thought was to get everyone as far from those soldiers as possible. So, he winds up like taking a different like way than they were supposed to take, which means that everything is mixed up because there are camps that are set up with food that's been like enchanted to stay fresh along the way, and they don't have those. They have like scheduled things that they're supposed to make, like the attack with the avians and the dark hunt or the night hunt or whatever it's called, and he misses those. The whole thing is just really like a disaster, and he keeps forgetting about the clues as well. And Shona tells this amazing story to remind him and everybody else about the clues. And he has to like stumble off by himself to like figure out what he's going to do. It turns out that it's going to be at Mum's lair. So that is Mara's place, which I think Priscilla thought I had gotten to this section. And I really just like whatever the clue is going to be, I hope Mara is able to help them out a little bit here because it just is not going well. And they just he does the best he can, but everybody is pretty miserable and cranky because it like also rained for a few days in a row. And Colette comes and she's supposed to have like the avians with her, but instead she's got pigs because they like tricked her. And he says that he's going to like make an illusion instead that mimics the attack, but he winds up just not doing that and just tells everybody, I was able to forestall the evil. Like, yeah, it's no good. He took the pilgrims toward the wild hunt the next day. That's it, wild hunt. They missed it entirely. Blade could not understand it. He had led everyone through the confusing hilly landscape, not confused at all, and quite confident that he was converging on the place near the river where the hunt was to find them. And instead, they came out above the wide green vale where Mara's aunt's house was, 3 days early. Blade was almost as astonished to see it as Colette had been to see the pigs. So that is the end of chapter 20 and the end of this section. So, yeah, I'm very interested to see what's going to happen at Mara's place. And I assume that things are being like moved around, and that's part of why Blade is so confused. But this was like just so anxiety inducing. And I really hope for Shona's sake that she's able to work something out with Geoffrey to get him to stay forever, because I just want Shona to be happy. All right, everybody. Well, thank you all again so much for listening. Thank you to Priscilla for commissioning this and for being here. Next Tuesday is going to be another one, and I will be doing 2 in a row that day. So that'll be fun. I'll be able to stop and read. And I just hope that if you guys are listening and have been enjoying, I know some people listen to these without actually reading the book, but pick up the book. Do that. And I will see you again soon with a new episode. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.